10 reasons not to hop trains. Now, I'm a firm believer that if you want to do something, you will find a way to do it. So the point of this video is just to explain why most people don't or shouldn't hop trains. A few are intuitive, but there are a few that might surprise you. Number 1, logistics. In the modern era, hopping trains doesn't really make sense logistically. In the long run, it's almost always cheaper, safer, faster, more comfortable, and more precise to drive, or even catch a flight if you book in advance. Someone told me long ago that these methods of traveling, train, and hitchhiking seem like they're saving you money, but they end up costing you just as much because you can be waiting around for days, buying food and water and resupplying. Most people don't have that kind of spare time unless they work seasonally or are unemployed. Most of the time, you're waiting at a catch-out spot for a long time, which I don't mind, but most people find boring and just don't have the time for. They have to pay bills, raise kids, take care of pets, water their plants. I don't have kids or pets, my family doesn't need my help, and I keep my expenses as low as possible. That's a blessing most people don't have. You might think you're on a weekend trip and you'll be home in a few days, but you can sink a whole weekend just camping in the bush and never catching a single train, and you have to be okay with that. And even if you do succeed on a weekend trip, you have to get home somehow, and those last-second transit options always cost a lot. The only reason you would really hop a train in most parts of the country is for the adventure, or if you don't own a car. There has been a point in my life where I legitimately had no money to catch a flight, had to be home within a week, so I had no choice but to ride freight. But it's not something you should do if you're on a schedule, because the schedule is usually too unpredictable. The whole process is also just a lot to learn, and whether you learn by trial and error or through a dedicated road dog, it just sinks a lot of your time, which is why most train hoppers are young people who have little to lose and few responsibilities. Even the process of riding, if it's your first time, it's exhilarating, but by your 100th train, passing through the Nebraska prairie again, knowing that the scenery is going to drag on for the next 14 hours is going to feel boring. Number 2, getting stranded. People ask how I know where trains are going, and if that's something you have to ask, then there's a pretty good chance you're the kind of person who's going to end up in the middle of nowhere. If a train breaks in some industrial zone 30 miles from any store and you're low on food or water, what are you going to do? The workers at the industrial zone are rushing to and from work and generally won't have time for you. What if the train breaks in the middle of the desert or forest? Doesn't matter how much supply you have, it runs out eventually. Now, this is not something that commonly happens, given that trains need to go where people are to some extent, but it is possible for it to happen, and I have heard of people sighted out far enough from civilization with no supplies and no cell service. It could be a death sentence if you're unlucky enough. I've been kicked out in the middle of nowhere and survived only by sneaking back onto the same train later on. Number 3, danger. This is an obvious one. I would argue what kills or injures most people is stupidity and a little bit of bad luck. I will say stupidity instead of ignorance because I started out on a much more dangerous hobby when I was a teenager, which is running subway tunnels. So I had much less clearance and a third rail to deal with, and even then, there were certain things I knew not to do, like going under train wheels or testing my luck with the timing of trains. There are so many ways to die or get injured on a train that it could be its own video, because there are hundreds of trackside deaths every year, most of them not even from trespassers, but just from civilians. Aside from getting hit directly, you can get caught and dragged, bucked off a moving train and thrown under it, have your shins smashed into equipment as you're running alongside a train, get injured dismounting, get zapped by the third rail if there's a third rail, or by an unexpected passenger train, have a boxcar door close on you and trap you in there till you dehydrate, have a load of scrap metal shift on you and impale you, get caught in a coal chute and asphyxiate, get knocked off a train because you climb up while bridge beams are flying by. So many dumb ways to die. Beyond trains, there's also an element of danger in the sense that you're going through a lot of sketchy neighborhoods sometimes, which don't take kindly to outsiders, and you will stand out. Doesn't matter if you have no money, you have a bag and gear, and that could mean something to someone. You're always a potential target to someone who's desperate enough. Nature can be dangerous too, especially in bear country. Even people who work around tracks for decades can get unlucky. I wouldn't go anywhere near train tracks if I was drunk, high, or incapacitated in any way, but a lot of people do, including riders, which brings me to the next point. Number 4, drug culture. If you're an addict or a recovering addict, the drug culture that surrounds trains is way too enabling. For someone who's looking to avoid getting sucked into that life or going back into it, it'll be hard because drugs are so abundant and a lot of addiction surrounds the culture. This has never been a problem for me, but I know it is a problem for friends of mine who struggle with addiction. You can argue that this could happen anywhere, but the boredom of a long wait doesn't help, and neither does being around the kinds of parts of a city that are surrounded by drugs. Number 5, legal issues. Going onto train tracks is seen as trespassing, which is a minor issue as far as any crime goes, but how it gets enforced is really a dice roll that depends on location, rail company, and the cops that you get. Often you might get a ticket, and you're probably not going to wait around another month in a faraway state for trial. You're probably not going to be able to pay a fine, so that ticket ends up turning into a warrant, and a warrant ends up turning into jail time if you're caught in the same state again. Ask anyone with a criminal record, they'll tell you a record is not something you want to have. You might even instantly end up in jail in certain states with really hard-ass laws, or you might just get unlucky with the officer that gets sent out. People get misconstrued for terrorists, drug mules, escaped convicts, and you might be treated as such. I have heard in the last few decades that judges are less likely to give jail time because it generally doesn't make sense to let the state pay for an undesirable to stick around and drain their resources by keeping them in jail. But it's still not a position you want to be put in because legal shit is a headache, even if you know it well. Number 6, the elements. I don't think this one can be understated. I've been out in 115-degree heat waves, a whole day of downpour with no shelter, freezing levels of cold that feel even worse with wind chill. People have frozen to death on trains. For most train cars, and don't be a smartass, for most train cars there's no AC, no heater, no ceiling that will prevent you from getting wet unless you're in an open box car, which is becoming more and more rare. Even a tarp only does so much at a certain point, and I almost never lug a tarp around because of the space and weight that it takes up. You're going through industrial areas full of carcinogens and heavy pollutants, and you can often smell it. Mosquitoes swarm you, ticks climb on you. None of that is fun, and it makes you appreciate the comforts of some sort of home. 7, physical demand. The strain of riding trains is intense. You're hiking for miles between hop-outs in cities, climbing fences and long strings of cars while lugging around tons of gear, including food and water, walking on sharp rocks, sleeping on solid ground or metal, which can be rough even with a pad. You're waking up every couple hours to listen if your train is coming, and all that interrupted sleep takes a toll on you. People aren't building nice restaurants or grocery stores by train tracks most of the time, so you're often in a food desert where your options are shitty gas station food or fast food, and that's not a winning combo when you're essentially going through freight train basic training. It's like all the negatives of camping with almost none of the good things about it. Number 8, dirt and grime. Again, another thing that can't be understated. Trains pick up so much dust and nobody washes them because there's over 1 million cars in circulation. Why would they? If you put your hands near a train car, you'll notice how quickly your hands turn black. A good proxy for this is squeeze a bike wheel and see all the dust and dirt of miles just rub off on you. That's what trains are like. This stuff ends up covering any exposed part of your body, and the wind blows it back at you as you ride. Okay, so now you're covered in weird grease and brake dust that probably has asbestos in it. Where do you shower? And even if you take a river bath, you're still going to smell like a river. Where do you do laundry? And God forbid you ride a loaded coal train, you will turn black. And I don't mean dark, I mean everything you own becomes the color black. And that's never seemed worth it to me. Number 9, the people. Riding trains surrounds you with tweakers and cops, and I don't really like spending a lot of time around either. I'm also very outspokenly political because riding trains is a deeply political activity, and I'm not even as strongly leftist as a lot of other people I meet on the rails. You might take issue with that if you have any sort of more moderate or conservative beliefs. On one hand, you might deal with people who have mental health issues who think that supporting social justice gives them a pass to be a shitty person. You could deal with a hard-ass cop threatening to throw you in jail because he thinks he caught a serial killer, or you could have a relentless tweaker talking your head off because he thinks he's found an ally in you because you're around and you have no choice but to listen. Some people enjoy all that, but at a certain point, no matter what, people exhaust me. I help people when I can, but I don't have a savior complex, and I think not everyone can or should have my time. Number 10, people's perception of you. This ties back into number 9. As you can tell by some of the comments these videos get, a lot of people don't have respect for train hoppers, regardless of how you are in person. You get lumped in with the junkies, the degenerates, you're dirty, you're homeless, you're on welfare, you have no job and no money, which makes you useless to society, or you have money, but you're choosing to be useless to society. It doesn't matter what's true or not. That's going to be people's instinct until you prove them wrong. I mean, hell, I inherently don't trust most hoppers that I meet until they give me a reason to, and that's just because I grew up skeptical towards most people in general. I give train hoppers the benefit of the doubt, but that's very different than giving my trust. Honestly, I would recommend other means of budget travel first that are more comfortable and more accessible: biking, Greyhound, hitchhiking. I'm not saying this to dissuade anyone, because like I said, people will do what they want at the end of the day. I'm not doing some reverse psychology Jedi mind trick. These are genuinely annoying things about hopping trains. And there is a lot to complain about. You can hit the lowest lows, and I think you are more likely to hit the low points than the highest high points at a certain level. It's possible to have fun and memories and build community. It does build discipline and patience and meditation. All of that is true. But I'm just telling all these things because it's a more honest view of what train hopping is like. And all these reasons are why I think most people just aren't built for train hopping.